Good evening. Fires are burning across large parts of London tonight as more serious violence breaks out on the streets of the capital for the third night in a row.
8th of August 2011. So this was day 3 of rioting in London that began when Mark Duggan, who was a young black man from Tottenham, was shot by police.
Mark Duggan was shot dead by police on Thursday. His family do not believe that he was armed or that he opened fire first. On Saturday, there was a small, peaceful demonstration of his supporters. Within hours, Tottenham was in flames.
I was living in Ealing in London with my fiancé. I was about to try and go full-time as a freelance composer at that point, after 15 or so years of trying to make it in the music business. It was a risky plan because I had no more guaranteed paychecks and I was reliant on the small amount of success I'd already had to get more work. So it was a difficult part of life. It was quite a big transition, and it had been quite a challenging year for me physically and emotionally as well. I'd had surgery to try and correct an arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmia, so I was left with lots and lots of bruising from that surgery. I was working the other side of London at the time and my commute was about an hour and 40 minutes each way. I was still doing a part-time job to kind of ease into the transition, and I'd come home a lot later than usual. I'd met with my stepdad, we'd had pizza and red wine, and I was feeling like happy, having caught up on family news. And when I got to the station, the train pulled in and my fiance called me and he said, "There's a really heavy police presence in Ealing. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to come and meet you from the station just so I know you're going to be safe." And then when I'd met him, he said he'd had to jump over a fence to get away from like a gang of people with hoods up and scarves over their faces. But we just thought, so many police, you just thought, well, nothing's going to happen because they must have preempted it. They'll know, right? After 2 nights, this has already happened. Surely they'll have a strategy.
A lot of police officers on duty. But I do urge now that parents start contacting their children and asking where their children are. There are far too many spectators who are getting in the way of the police operations to tackle criminal thuggery and burglary.
It was based on the assumption that we had that Ealing is quite a middle class area, lots of expensive houses, and we didn't have an expensive house, but it wasn't the kind of place where you have council estates right next to mansions where there's that sort of natural tension that occurs. That's not really what Ealing is. And we were on the first floor of a building that was opposite Ealing Green, so it was away from the main high street. There was a shopping centre just up the road from us, but they'd closed that down altogether, so that was like metal shutters, no one was getting in there. Ealing's not really a shopping hub either. I mean, it's got a shopping centre, but there's nothing special that you can't get umpteen million other places. Anyway, we got home and you couldn't really tell there was anything happening. It was quite quiet outside. We just sat down and we were watching the news coverage, and we'd been doing that for the last 2 nights anyway. And we were debating where it might happen next, and felt like things had been spiralling out of control. All because we kept hearing that the police couldn't cope, and I don't know, you just assume that they will have some way of dealing with this stuff when it happens, but they obviously didn't, and they were struggling with it. It seemed like people were just being opportunistic. They thought, well, there's already trouble. It felt to them like there wouldn't be any consequences because there were just so many people involved. And they were looting shops, getting things for free. It probably felt like a bit of fun or whatever. So as we were then watching the news, heard breaking glass down the road and an alarm going off, and just thought, oh, we'll check this out. Couldn't really see out the window, but there was no other noises and we couldn't see anyone out there, so I went down to have a look because I thought I should alert a shopkeeper if their shop's not safe. I should let them know so they can come and board it up or whatever. But the glass wasn't even probably broken, it was just smashed, and there was still no one around. So okay, we thought that must be people passing through, they're going somewhere else. But then about 30 minutes later, suddenly there were people running down our street and there were cars on fire and there were car alarms going off and people were congregating on Ealing Green because it's dark, and there was no police there. The police were all up the other end where the shopping centre was. So there was like 200 people outside the front of our house, and then they decided to smash the way into the shop, which was on the ground floor, and we were on the first floor. And that was unbelievably terrifying. It was so loud and the building was shaking, and we just didn't know what to do. There's nothing that really prepares you for that moment, because you're just taken by surprise. One minute you're sitting watching TV, watching this happening somewhere else, and the next minute you have no idea if people are just going to smash through your front door and kill you. That's how terrifying it feels. And then we saw them go to the pub so we were on a T-junction, and on the other side of the T-junction, also facing the green, was a big pub. I could see the owners of the pub out on the first floor roof, and we kind of acknowledged each other, but they looked bemused just as we were. And we saw the rioters smash through the door of the pub, breaking windows. They were sort of filing in and then coming out with bottles of spirits, and then they started ripping up t-shirts or whatever they had to hand and putting them in the top, lighting them like Molotov cocktails and throwing them up at the windows of where we lived. One pinged off the light that hangs over a shop sign. So we turned out the lights, and we were just crouching in our house thinking, what do we do? We tried to get through to the police, and we couldn't get through. There was no answer. And then when we did, they said, we don't have anyone to send to you, but we'll add it to the queue, because obviously there's a lot of stuff going on all over London. There's just no one else left to send, and they can't even dispatch fire brigade or anyone else if the place hasn't been made secure. If they're getting attacked by rioters, they're not going to be able to put out a fire. We just thought, well, they'll take whatever they want, they'll move on. It had crossed my mind that perhaps the pub would be somewhere they might consider setting a light to, just because it's on the corner and it's quite a big building. But instead I heard someone saying that they wanted to start a fire, and this was right outside our window. People were coming round from the back of the building. There was a skip full of foam because the shop was having a refit, and they were pulling that out, bringing it around the front of the building. And then I could hear the exchange where they were asking each other who had a lighter, and we just thought, we can't stay, we have to leave now. We'd gone out and bumped into our neighbours in their doorway, and they were just wearing dressing gowns and looking totally not ready to leave the building. Total confusion on their faces, just like us. And then we said, okay, well, we need to go upstairs and knock on the doors, because there was another floor above ours. Make sure that no one's left in the building, but we didn't get any answers, so we didn't know. They could have been asleep, there could have been children there, people with disabilities that couldn't get down the stairs. Just all kinds of things cross your mind at that time. I was so high on adrenaline at that point. I felt like I wanted to go out there and, I don't know, just confront people and say, what the hell do you think you're doing? This is my life, this is my world that you're smashing right now. For what? Obviously my fiance wasn't about to let me go outside and start confronting people, but adrenaline's quite funny in that sense. When you're terrified, you often laugh, or you just react in a way that you're not expecting. It was just anarchy. No one cared what was happening to us, and I know that there's a certain irony in that, because the people that were rioting said that they felt disenfranchised and they felt like no one cared what was happening to them either. But I think it's kind of one thing to destroy a shop that might be a part of a big chain. They'll definitely have insurance. There's a difference between doing that and smashing a building where there's obviously people living above it who are home, and then setting a light to it. That's like a whole other level of crazy. And once we knew we had to leave, that meant you're in that cliched moment where you're saying to yourself, what do I save now the house is burning down? And in that flat I had lots of things that meant a lot to me. I lost my mum in 2004. I had photos of her, things that couldn't ever be replaced. My violin, my musical instruments, my hard drives with all my music on it. I wanted to take my violin with me, but it just wasn't practical because we didn't know if we'd have to run. We just didn't know what was going to be awaiting us once we did leave. And then we went out onto the stairwell, and just remember one of the clearest memories of that night, thinking what we might never see them again. So we just said good luck, and then we didn't know until the morning whether they got out alive or if there was anybody injured. We just had no idea. As it turned out, there was a man who just, 200 yards from us, had gone out and confronted someone setting fire to a bin, and they punched him and he died, and the ambulance couldn't get to him because it wasn't safe. it was just, it's terrifying to think that anyone would do that. The entrance to our building was at the back, so all we could really see what was going on at the front. We didn't know if there'd be people waiting for us outside, so we just put our hoods up and kept our heads down and just walked. We knew that around the front of the building was about 200 people. They were armed, they had metal bars and broken bottles and just other stuff that they'd picked up along the way. They'd smashed their way into restaurants when people were eating and like threatened them and stolen things. And these people were just caught up in this mob mentality. So it wasn't something that we wanted to be close to, we just wanted to get away. So we walked up towards the common, and once we got to the main road, a car pulled over and beckoned my fiance over, and I just thought they were going to shoot us. I didn't know what to expect at all, but they just said, "You need to get off the road, it's coming this way." And they didn't say what. I don't know if they thought that we were part of the riot or whether they meant the police were coming this way, but any of those options were just terrifying. And so we just left the main road, went down a side road, came out the other end, and we were next to a hotel, so we just went in there. I'd glanced over my shoulder a couple of times as we'd been walking down our road away from the building, and there was smoke coming out of the front of it, so I had a good idea that it would be on fire. When we got into the hotel lobby, it was extremely surreal. People were just sitting, sipping their drinks with their laptops, music playing, like another world. Like, you'd never know that anything awful was happening, like half a mile down the road. We had like just 2 rucksacks and our laptops inside. I was wearing shorts, no socks and trainers, and we had to pay 100 quid for a room, and then we sat in the room all night. I'd gone into shock, I was sweating and shaking, and we were watching the news, and you could see that Sky had a helicopter over the top of the building that we lived in, and it was just a towering inferno. It was so surreal. So neither of us really slept. We decided about 7 AM that we needed to go back and see if there was anything left. So when we got there, the fire brigade was still there, and they were still pumping gallons of water into the building to try and put out the fire. And we didn't know what to do. We were just there was people behind the cordon, lots of people, loads of press were there was stuff going on, and the guys from the pub gave us tea, and then I had to go and just find a firefighter and say, "That's our house, so what do we do?" And they just said, "It's not looking good, there's nothing left." I asked if they'd found my violin, because they'd said that the back of the building was the least damaged, and even though they didn't know that the building was safe, it might have collapsed, anything could happen, this guy went back in and he came out holding my violin, which was dripping wet, and I opened it and it was wet, but it was there and it was in one piece. I was like a tiny little glimmer of hope out of a horrible, horrible traumatic experience.
So the roof's caved in.
We had news crews approaching us, so I did Sky Live News interview and then LBC, and in some ways it was difficult because I had to relive what had happened, but it was also kind of a distraction. It was like a coping mechanism. By voicing that out loud, and especially to a stranger, in a way I could start to process what had happened. So often trauma gets buried and only comes back years later. So it wasn't for another couple of years when I really began to kind of experience the emotional effects of, having 200 people outside your house that wish you dead or destroy your life effectively. And then the whole insurance debacle to follow was in many ways worse than having a house burnt down. Insurers don't help you with accommodation. Tell you that because you won't be paying rent in that place, you can pay rent somewhere else. But what they forget is that that's a ridiculous notion. Because you've paid rent in advance, you're not going to get that back straight away. How are you supposed to get accommodation? You have no documents, you can't prove who you are, you can't prove you've got a job, that you've got an income. There is nothing. So you can't just go and move in somewhere else. We just had to leave London. I didn't really want to be there. I didn't want to risk seeing any more of that stuff happening. So we got on a train and stayed with family for a couple of weeks, still doing interviews, and it kind of got to the point of obsession. Because once a journalist figures out that they can speak to you and that you're happy to talk to the press, they chase you for it. David Cameron, the Prime Minister at the time, had made a promise to not leave anyone out of pocket. But even just by getting to safety, we were already out of pocket, and it seemed like his promise only mattered for businesses. People forgot that people lost their homes and were traumatised by what happened. People set up PayPal accounts or GoFundMe accounts and gave them thousands to help rebuild, but we got nothing, and insurance was really obstructive. They didn't have any sympathy with us, it seemed. It was just all very difficult. It nearly ruined our relationship as well. There was such a lot of pressure because we had nowhere where we could be us on our own and like go through things or talk in other people's houses and pretending that you're fine. We also, because we were both working freelance, we weren't making any money if we weren't at work, so we had to come back to London, we had to go back to work. When your house burns down, you have to then go into what could be an unsafe building with a loss adjuster who decides how much insurance you should get. That was the first time we'd seen the inside of the building. And the guy didn't seem to care that it would be traumatic for us or dangerous. And we just had to pick through all these mouldy, smoke-damaged clothes and all this debris of stuff that we'd bought as a couple, hard-earned money, our first home together. It had a lot of value to us that wasn't money. So you kind of begin to imagine what it would have been like inside the building and what would have happened if you hadn't been able to escape, or what if my fiancé hadn't been off that night. You start questioning why did you live, and why did the guy down the road who got beaten to death, why did he not live? So many things that you have to deal with, and then the hell of the admin of trying to deal with an insurance claim, which should cover everything that you own. It's just a massive load of things to take on all at once, so it does put a real strain on your relationship. It's a big deal for me. I'm kind of reliant on my little bubble of safety quite often. So once the loss adjuster had decided that it was a total loss, i.e. there is nothing coming back from it, they told us we had to list all of our possessions, like every single thing. I mean, just think how hard that is, everything that's in your house. I've had a mental health condition for 20 years, so my memory is shot anyway. Suddenly, even though you've paid for your insurance, what you get paid is dependent on your ability to remember what you had. Doing that inventory took days, and I had to keep going back to the building, and it stank now because it was wet and there was mouldy plaster, there was mould growing on the walls, and the kitchen cabinets had all collapsed into the middle of the room, and there was mouldy food. And the bathroom ceiling had collapsed, so you couldn't open the door, and it was not a nice place to be. It was just like the inside of hell. Well, they sent this company who was supposed to come and pick up boxes of your stuff, take it away, see if they could clean it up and give it back to you. So the first company that went and took our stuff, they decided not to go with that company. So three boxes of my memories of my mum, photos and stuff, had gone off, and I had to then track them down because the insurance company wouldn't do it. These are the only things that matter to me. All of the stuff that's furniture and anything of monetary value, none of that matters. I just wanted to have my musical instruments and my photos. Lots of the stuff that would have been okay had they got it out early just got ruined because it was left inside a wet, mouldy building. Even my piano, which had been my mum's and meant a lot to me, that was left in there, and they basically told me they weren't going to take it out because they didn't want to spend the money. So I had to go to the press and put pressure on them, and eventually they agreed that they would take it out and clean it up at least and give it back to me. You know, musical instruments to me are worth more than the sum of their parts. They have their own personality in some ways, so they do matter. doesn't matter what they're made of, that you create something beautiful with them, so they have a lot of meaning. It felt really disrespectful, the way that they talked about our things as if it didn't matter. They give you what's called an interim payment, a small part of your total claim, and they posted it to the flat that had burnt down. And then it transpired that the postman had been just putting through letters, through a door that then led to nothing, because there was nothing on the other side of it. It was just a burnt down building. Stupid little things like that, where you're thinking, well, I've got no money, what am I going to do? And it would take them 5 minutes to just ask us where we wanted it to be sent to, but they didn't even take the time to do that. I'd gone back to do a Sky News interview. I'd gone into the studio to be on a panel, and Sky had paid for my train fare to do that. After I did the interview, somehow they added my bank details onto loads of their invoices, so they ended up paying bits of pieces of money into my account for about a year. And I didn't notice because there was obviously quite a lot of stuff going on at that time. They'd wrongly paid about £3,000 into my bank account, which I am still paying back. And I was the one that raised that to them. So they didn't come to me and say, oh, we've done this, we're very sorry. I went to them and said, look, what's happening? Why am I getting this money? And they said, oh, actually, that's £3,000 you now owe us. When it's a bit of money every other week or something, you just don't notice it. It just felt comedic at times. You'd think dealing with disasters is an everyday thing for insurers, that's what they do. And yet they just couldn't operate properly with any sort of ethical or moral compass at all. I needed to just be recovering. I didn't need to be doing their job for them. We'd given statements to the police during all of this, and they'd called us a couple of times with updates. So we'd had to relive everything again in as much detail as we could remember. Did you see any of the faces? Well, I saw it was dark. Everyone was wearing hoodies, they had scarves over their faces. I couldn't tell anything about them. We were afraid to look out the window, so of course we didn't really see anybody. But after the second update call we got from the police, that was it. We never heard from them again. So the people they said were the arsonists would have been brought on attempted murder charges. I saw a CCTV photo of 2 of the suspects in the Evening Standard about a month later, and that was the last I heard of it. Those people are probably still out there. Even accessing victim support was difficult because they were in Ealing and we'd stayed with friends in South East London, which is the other side, so I would have had to take more unpaid time off work to go and have counselling. And eventually Ealing Council paid for us to move into a travel lodge for 6 weeks whilst we tried to find a flat to move into. Didn't have cooking facilities, obviously, so you're just eating snacks. My fiancé worked nights, so I'd have to be lying in the room in the dark during the day or out somewhere so that he could sleep. And then I had another abdominal surgery during the time we were there and was laid up in bed for a week after that. Everything was just really stressful and we had no control over our lives at all. Nothing was within our control, and it felt like we were being made to feel guilty for something that we hadn't done. There was a newspaper article where my insurers and the loss adjusters had kind of claimed that they'd acted professionally and promptly, and they had sympathy that we were underinsured, and kind of pointed the finger at us. Also then your insurance premium is inflated for years because you have to say you've had a claim, so you end up paying for it twice. There was a statement they made to the press that said that our case illustrated the importance of regularly reviewing the level of home contents insurance people have. But if I remember correctly, when I took out the policy, I was given recommended levels of insurance based on how many people live in the home, how big the home is, any sort of non-standard items you have. I don't know anyone that would be able to list out every single possession they have. So it's completely unrealistic. We finally got things together, got our documents together, and in October we were able to move into a new place, and that's when we had to start trying to claim from the government's riot fund. The reason there was a government compensation scheme was because riot and civil disturbance and any damage that arises from that isn't covered under insurance policies, so every insurance company that had to pay out for riot damage was able to then claim that money back from the government. So the insurance company weren't even losing money from this.
Shops, businesses, homes, too many have been vandalised or destroyed, and I give the people affected this promise. We will help you repair the damage, get your businesses back up and running, and support your communities.
They kept referring me to a clause that said you couldn't claim for anything that wasn't a physical object. So lost wages, food expenses, finding new places to live, travelling. It would only be physical items and at their current market worth. So think of any object that you have in your house that once you've bought it and used it, is worth nothing. How are you going to replace that if they don't give you the value of that?
On repairing the damages, I can confirm that any individual, homeowner or business that has suffered damage to or loss of their buildings or property as a result of rioting can seek compensation under the Riot Damages Act, even if uninsured. The government will ensure the police have the funds they need to meet the cost of any legitimate claims.
Anyway, I fought them for about a year to try and get this compensation. I wrote to my MP, I wrote to the Home Office, and I just got back very late and insensitive sounding replies. Well, how unfortunate is it that you are underinsured? They're just making excuses, and they ploughed more money into arresting people to be seen to be taking action than they did in people who needed their lives putting back together, who'd been victims.
And the government will also meet the immediate costs of emergency accommodation for families made homeless by these disturbances.
So it was useful for them to be able to distract away from the people that really needed that money and help at the time. I still get emails and calls from journalists saying, oh, we're doing a story, can you speak to us? And if you email back, you'll share something of that story with them. You might share an update about your life. And if it's not in time, they don't even have the courtesy to reply to you and say thank you, but we've missed the deadline. They don't care, because to them it's not real. I find the attitudes of the media, of insurers, of the government, were and are disgusting. They don't have a plan for when something of this magnitude happens to people, and they have no understanding of the emotional effects that causes, and those effects, you see them throughout society. We have prisons full of people who are suffering from mental ill health and who haven't been supported. It's costing more money than you could ever imagine, yet it's just about the politics.
I guess I've got the tendency to think about it quite a lot more now. Just, I don't really feel safe wherever I am. I kind of think, well, even if I'm in my house, someone can get me. The whole concept you have of your home being your safe haven is not there anymore. We had nowhere that was private to kind of let all of that stuff out. And I just feel a bit more throwaway about life, because I think, well, it could all just end tomorrow. Albie and me and his dad Rob, and that's it, just the three of us, a little family. Why are we whispering? I've got a history of eating disorders, let's say, so it's kind of all kicked in again more recently. So yeah, I'm not exactly the poster girl for fit and healthy right now, but yeah. Ta-da!